Hey people, how are you doing? Welcome to episode 256. That's 256 weeks since COVID. We were allowed out of our cages and back to practice, the non-allied health professionals. 256 weeks, and that's where we are. Sports Therapy Association podcast. Sorry, a bit too much reflection there in the first 30 seconds, but my name is Matt Phillips, creator of unchatlive.com. And as always, this episode is being recorded live on the Sports Therapy Association YouTube channel and on Facebook on a Tuesday night at 8 p.m. So if you listen to the podcast, then first of all, thank you. But secondly, I'd really encourage you to come along if you can. If that's in your time zone and you can make some time there, come along and share some time with the other people who joined us live. You can ask questions directly to the guest. And you know what? After a wonderful conference we've just had, you really do take a lot more in by joining stuff live, because you can address questions and concerns there on the spot. You'll reflect more whilst you're listening to it, and you'll wake up the next day with more in your brain. It's fact, it's science. But obviously, if you can't, then I appreciate you listening to the podcast. So as I just kind of mentioned, last weekend was indeed the STA Southwestern Hands-on Hub Conference in Exmouth in collaboration with the ST School. It was an amazing weekend. I'm biased, but it was a lovely weekend. Of networking, of workshops, great information. I mean, the takeaway for most people was, yes, of course, there was great information. We had amazing speakers like Dr. Claire Minshall, Serena Williams, we had Andy Hosgood, we had James Earls, huge amounts of speakers there. But it's not just the information. If it was only about the information, then download a PDF or watch a video. It wasn't about that, just that at all. What you pay for at a conference, this is going to be a common theme now on the podcast, is you go there to be given this information in such a way that's meaningful, where you're going to give time to reflect, to network, to talk to friends. So when you do go back to clinic, it's actually there. We spent the last hour or so formulating plans of how to turn all this wonderful information to reality. So it really was as we planned. And I've got to give thanks to Andy Hosgood as well, just for helping me along with that. It was lovely. It was really cool. And it's given us loads of ideas for the future. So if you did miss out on it, don't worry. Well, our aim is to take it around the country like Noel Edmonds and the multicoloured swap shop for those of you who are old enough. I know Ben is. That's our plan. Because it worked, and we are working on a follow-up version, so stay tuned. We're going to do a reflection episode next Tuesday, September the 30th, so if you want to join us live for that, especially if you went to the conference, and do come along, and we'll let you know what worked, what maybe didn't work so well. That won't be very long. We'll have a great time. It's going to be me, Anna Maria Mazzieri, Gary Benson, founder of the STA, and also Andy Hosgood's coming along as well. Now, one of the themes of the conference was supporting soft tissue therapists in becoming more evidence-informed, as always. So an aspect of that is obviously keeping up with the latest research. But that's what made me think about this episode tonight. How easy is it to do that? How easy is it to understand a research paper? To be able to judge its quality, reliability, its significance in what we are going to do Monday morning in the clinic. So therefore, it gives me great pleasure to introduced, hopefully some of you don't know him, otherwise this is all a waste of time. If you don't know him, I'm jealous, because he's a wealth of information who's guided me. I've stood on his shoulders more than one time back in the good old days around 2013, because he was saying stuff before lots of people around these days are saying it. A great thinker, great educator in the industry, and that's Ben Cormack, founder of 𝐶 KIN. First time I've said it correctly, and co-founder of the Better Clinician Project. Ben's a musculoskeletal therapist with a clinical background, qualification in sports therapy, rehabilitation exercise, stretching back, like I say, over 20 years, with a special interest in pain and its relation to movement. His core kinetic courses have run in over 25 countries globally, working with individual healthcare professionals, health services, hospitals, elite sports teams, and pain services and organisations. So very excited to have him here tonight. If you have joined us live, then do feel free to ask questions and leave comments in the section. Let me just have a quick check before I do bring them up. For example, Cecily Hislop says, listening whilst hanging the washing out. That's how I roll. Multitasking, Cecily. Very good. I like it. Do feel free to ask questions. It's a wonderful opportunity, people, if you've joined us live. Right then, I've left him down there for long enough. So let's bring up man of the hour. How to read a research paper, episode 256 of the Sports Therapy Association video podcast, with special guest Ben Cormack of Core KIN and the Better Clinician Project. Hey, Ben. How are you?
I'm very well, mate. How are you?
You look so relaxed now. You look like you haven't got a worry in the world. You're brilliant.
Oh,
I like that.
Too many worries. I've got too many worries for them to be on my face.
I like the plant in the background as well. It's very relaxing. I think that's what it's all about. So good to see you, man. Like I said, we haven't met up in person for years, but Do you look back at like 2010 with fond memories? Was life simpler back then, do you think?
Well, I don't know if it was. I don't know if it was simpler, but
Before
certainly I
kids, less
do look
kids?
back.
Oh.
Six kids now, but no, I'm joking.
No.
So yes, of course, they were the. I remember you coming up to Canary Wharf and helping me out one time, and that must have been a good 12, 13
Over a
years
decade,
ago.
yeah.
Yeah, over a decade, and
How did that
yeah,
happen?
so good times. It's always good to look back and think about the journey and reminisce on how that's been, isn't it? So yeah, my pleasure to be here with you, sir.
I do wonder, and this is just information coming into my head listening to you. Is it difficult for, I'm not going to say old timers, that makes you sound old, but you were coming up with you were talking about biopsychosocial before biopsychosocial was even a thing on social media. You were talking about the neuromatrix, you were talking about smudging, you were talking about everything before, and now it's like people jumping on their soapboxes going, oh, don't you know it's this? And you're thinking, yeah, I wrote about that about 12, 13 years ago.
Wow.
Do you let it go off your shoulders, or is it frustrating?
Yeah, of course. I mean, look, in the same way that the people that were talking about it 10 years before and
Good
years
answer.
before that, and so I think there's a saying, isn't there? Everything that's been said has been said before by someone smarter a long time ago. So that's it's the circle of life, Matt.
You see, so humble, people. This is what I just wanted you to realise. What a great way to be educated by someone who's so humble. Anyway, so yeah, thank you very much for joining us. Really appreciate it. So we're talking about research papers. Do you remember, again, just drawing on your experiences when you were a younger therapist, do you remember kind of thinking a bit daunting, looking at research paper, thinking, oh my God, how am I going to make head or tail of this? Or maybe is it sometimes still daunting?
Yeah, well, if I'm being honest, I find it more boring now.
Okay.
Because not in a horrible way, but in the sense that you maybe I don't read as much that is exciting. I think when you first start reading a lot of research and you're picking up on new themes and these type of things, there's some things that are game changing. You talk about things like the whole kind of Melzak's neuromatrix theory, and I think there was early work by Lorimer coming out, and and it was all very fresh and it was all very new, and I maybe feel that as you read more papers and maybe there's less that is groundbreaking for you potentially, but certainly some papers are a challenge to read. It could be really, really boring. They could be really, really badly written. Some are taught in a funny, like the formatting can be, not conducive to a good read, and some are just overly complex. So I think it can be daunting in different ways. For me, maybe potentially less exciting. And I think that, if you're getting into reading more evidence, then that's a really exciting time and you should feel excited about that.
That's good. Yeah, it does. And I think like you mentioned, there's some like great papers which are good quality, even papers that might not hold as much truth as they did, but back in the day when they were using the information they had, they were great. And it kind of really opened my eyes, and I think a lot of people's eyes, to things like about, I don't know, symmetry, for example, and asymmetry and the links with pain, all the classic kind of papers. So I think once people do kind of take that challenge and get to not be fearful of a few papers, then it kind of makes you think, okay, I might look at a couple more now. But then comes the problem of telling the difference between a poor quality research paper, which there's a few out there, and good quality, which is where you're going to come today. Yeah, you're going to help us understand where the limitations might be, where maybe the biases might be. Is that something which you can do for us?
I can give it a go. Let's see what happens. But yeah, I think it's a question I get asked quite a lot, like what is a good research paper, what is a bad research paper, and I don't know if there's a really binary answer to that, if that makes sense. I think it's probably a combination of a few different factors, so we can kind of chat about that. I think
I do like that. I'll just let people know tonight, a lot of Ben's answers will be, I don't think it's a binary answer, because that's, we're talking about healthcare. So it's not a case of it depends, but it does. And I love that, because your posts on Instagram and everything, there's always that non-certainty. You use the language like I like to use it, where you never totally commit because we don't know. Well, you know, and that's such a healthy way to therapists to have, I think. You know, take away the definites.
Yeah, I always say when I teach, whatever you expect to happen probably won't. You know, when you think you've nailed it, when you think you know what it is, when you think you're going to get a certain result, something completely off will happens, and you know it's. But I have a little saying that pain is predictably unpredictable, and you know that's the way that I see it.
That's quite liberating, though, isn't it, for a therapist, when they realise that it isn't black and white and you could well be wrong and things won't turn out, rather than just being these fixers and kind of directors. It's much more chilled out than that, maybe. It makes it a bit more relaxing. Or not.
I think it depends on who people are. So I think some people like the world in a very, you know, black and white boxes type of way, and some other people thrive in the messy and the chaos and, you know, sorting through the bits and the pieces. And, you know, again, I think it comes back to that diversity of human beings, doesn't it? That spectrum of tolerance of uncertainty.
Love it. Okay. Well, look, let's get into the nitty gritty of it. Maybe we're going to remember that if you're listening live, then do feel free to chuck questions in and the comments and stuff. But I'm thinking of a lot of people who download this later on. Let's imagine they've never seen a paper before, but they've reached that stage where they've got the confidence now to go, you know what? I understand. I've got to be a bit more evidence-based. I'm ready now. I'm not scared about tweaking it. I don't care if I've got to tell my clients that things are a bit different. Let's have a look at this paper. Can you take us through it and what they're going to see and where they should give attention?
Well, I think the first thing is, what type of paper is it?
Mm-hmm.
You know, are saying, is it a randomized controlled trial? Is it something where they're, you know, controlling a lot of variables and they're randomizing, you know, these type of things, which is designed to show a bit more of a causal relationship? Is it observation? Are we just watching what happens to a group over a period of time, or at one point in time? So we could have longitudinal data, or you have like cross-sectional, which is just a singular point in time. Or is it something narrative? Is it just someone saying, I want to write a subject and, you know, I'm going to get into the science and this type of thing. So I think the first thing is, what type of paper is it? You know, and then I think you can go from there to say, what does it tell me?
I like it. Okay. So pick one if you like. Let's go where someone might be looking for the evidence. I mean, we're talking about soft tissue therapy, massage therapists, but manual therapy, which is always full of claims and the need to move on. So what type of papers should people looking for in that case?
Well, I suppose, you know, the classic would be randomized controlled trial. So the point of the randomized controlled trial is to compare different groups. So what you'll do is you're going to take an intervention group, you're going to take, you know, potentially two kind of groups. So one may be the intervention you like, one might be a comparator. And then if it's a really well done trial, we might get a control group as well. So, you know, the point of an RCT is I suppose, two or three things. So first one would be that you are trying to find some form of causal relationship, you know, where you can actually say we've controlled the variables, and to kind of, you know, say that, rather than an observational trial, an observational piece of research where you have lots of confounding variables. Then the other point of an RCT is to reduce bias. So the point of an RCT really is to reduce bias, and you do that by randomization and you do that by binding as well. And those are the two real key tools, I think, that you'd be kind of looking for to say, you know, this is an RCT that's done reasonably well, that they are, you know, making sure they are covering bases to reduce bias. But one of the big things about RCTs is to, you know, essentially reduce bias and then find a relationship that we could say is reasonably direct and causal, because we know that we've controlled the variables, as I said, with observational stuff. so many different confounders, it's quite hard to make a causal kind of inference on that type of. So your CT would be kind of that classic one. So let's go. What you might find is you could look at, there was a recent RCT into spinal. Was it a systematic review? I can't remember. But a systematic review would often be a bunch of papers all on the same topic. Mm-hmm. So what you're doing is you're getting a bunch of papers all together, and you are kind of making sure they're reasonably similar. And then doing that, you kind of make sure that you can then compare and contrast the findings of these papers. All right. So I see someone's come in there straight away and gone into the technicalities of the.
Oh, really? My gosh, Tim. Okay.
And that's going to be a slightly different question. So a p-value is a slightly different thing that, is trying to find kind of what's the judgment of the difference between the two groups, whether that's statistical, and then if it's big enough, is it clinical?
We'll put a pin in that 1 minute, maybe. That'll come later on when we look at the results of that. There's one thing I just wanted to say, Ben, because there's one thing I wanted to say. Thanks, Tim. We will come back to that, by the way. But Ben, I wanted to kind of point out, because I think it's useful for everyone to realise this is essentially what science is supposed to be. And people go, oh, I don't trust science. Well, not everybody, but a lot of people going, oh, science isn't everything. Science doesn't know everything. And I think it was Dara O'Brien who said, yeah, science doesn't know everything. That's why it exists. Because the idea of science is make a hypothesis and then try and prove it wrong. And that's the whole idea of a paper, really, a quality research paper, is they have a hypothesis and they do everything they can to see if that's not true. That's the idea, isn't it?
Well, hopefully. And that's the point of whether a trial is well done.
Yeah.
Because if you do a trial and miss off some of the bits, then actually you're not doing it as well as you could do, and you introduce things like bias, right? So, I think that's the important part. Well done science is about, trying to do what you just said. But there is also science. There is a very famous quote that says, people use statistics like a drunk man uses a lamppost. More to support the illumination. And I think that's the great example, So this is why we need replication. So I see lots of pain was a great example of that. When the original research came out, they were talking about some really great numbers and, some really kind of big clinical effects and numbers needed to treat that were pretty good. And then actually when it was replicated by people who were not involved in the treatment or the system as a kind of business, we saw completely different results. Right? So replication, I think, is often where science becomes very, very unbiased, unless you're trying to prove something wrong. But I think that's the point of replication sometimes, is it, maybe allows it to take one step away from people that really want to prove it. And hopefully they really don't want to disprove it. But that element of equipoise and, what humans love to do is always it. So the design of the RCT is trying to say humans are biased. We love to have a hypothesis, and a good paper should report the hypothesis. So there's something called the consult guidelines, which means what it really is a template for writing up a randomized controlled trial. And within that, at the bottom of the introduction, it should be, what is your hypothesis? So rather than actually, saying, rather than being a bit woolly about it, a good paper should state what the research question is and what their hypothesis on that question is as well. And in that way, you get a sense of what is their bias straight away. So I really like that kind of reporting. So what is the research question? We're going to compare spinal manipulative therapy against exercise against a control group. We believe that spinal manipulative therapy will be superior. That would be the kind of thing. And then you go, okay, I understand where they're. At least they've been open and honest about their bias, rather than sometimes people don't report it and you don't really know what they think is going to happen or what have you. So I think that's an important thing within an RCT to find out.
Is that a bit of a red flag then? or they might have just forgotten, and it's annoying that it gets through because it's supposed to be peer reviewed and people are supposed to say, yeah, it's ready now for publication. But if they miss it out, is that straight away thinking, why did they miss that out then?
Well, I suppose, it depends on the age of the paper. So a lot of older papers might not conform to those guidelines, whereas a newer paper probably would. Certainly, peer review varies. I peer review papers, and some people might say that's a very variable thing as well. So I think that it depends on what journal it's published in, what kind of these type of things as well. But a good paper should say, what are they trying to find out? What is the actual question that they're trying to answer? And then what is their hypothesis on what they think is going to happen? And I think even though there's bias within that, there's clarity in that bias. It's honest bias, isn't it? And I don't mind that. If you see people, maybe not being as transparent with some of the things that could be reported, then maybe it's a little bit sketchy. But I don't like to ever think people are being nefarious and whatever.
Really?
So sometimes things are written better. Sometimes things are written by people who are English isn't their first language. If I had to write something, something Italian, I might not do a great job. So I think I like to give the benefit of the doubt, but with anything there is variation, and hence why you do have reporting guidelines, because it does help to have a checklist to say this tick, 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 and you are correct. Anyone who peer reviews that should go tick, 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 tick.
That's great. No, I don't want to interrupt your frame of thought now. You go for it. Keep going. So that was the title. And then also, down the bottom, you say it might even say something about the hypothesis. That's great.
So let's do it more systematically then. So firstly, you like to look at a paper and you need to say, what type of paper is it? What is the actual type of research? As we said, it could be a trial, it could be observational, it could be a systematic review, it could be a narrative review, blah, blah, blah. And we're going to look at the introduction. The introduction tells me, why are they doing this? Really, really simply, the whole point of the introduction is to say, what is the point of this research? Where is the gap in the market? That's always a good reason to do something, because there is a question that hasn't been answered. So there's a gap in the market, and every lower back pain paper starts off the same way. It says lower back pain is the biggest problem in the world. 80% of people suffer from it in their life. Right. So we'll go past that. But it could also be a minefield of good information to educate patients with, because it gives us epidemiology, it gives us prevalence, it gives us age ranges, and that's really good, for identifying a problem and also educating about that problem as well. So actually, the introduction is quite narrative, but also should have some good stuff in there that helps us as well. But at the bottom of that introduction, we are going to get, what is the study question? Hopefully, what is the hypothesis as well, if it's an RCT and it's written within the consult guidelines as well.
That's good. So don't skip the introduction then. Have a little look.
Well, people do though. So, if any piece of research is only as good as the methods that are used. So a really good example, there's a question about a p-value, right? And so a p-value is about, is it the hypothesis or the null hypothesis, right? And so how likely is that to be the case? And there's so many different interpretations of what a p-value actually means, right? And I don't even want to go there because it would make it hurt. But the guy to read is a guy called Sander Greenland. And he goes a lot into the kind of philosophy of statistics and frequentism. And, it goes back to, Fisher and Nyman and all these guys. And they're what's called frequent statisticians. We also have what's called Bayesian statistics, which is a bit more probability based rather than a p-value, which is a kind of a cutoff. But a p-value doesn't mean anything if the experiment is rubbish. So statistics matter if the experiment is not done well, because what's the point of having statistics or a p-value or a, an MCID, if you want to get a little bit, of a bigger effect size, there is no point if the methods are not done very well. So for me, the methods is probably the most important part of reading a paper. And you want to know, who are they researching? So if you had if let's say you were looking at a patellar tendinopathy and the age range was 50, 60 sedentary people, well, that wouldn't be relevant because we know the age range of patellar tendinopathy, 18 to 35, people who jump and do active stuff. That's why it's called jumper's knee, right? So we know the age range is. We know that there are certain things that you have to do to identify that as a specific pathology. So you want to know, is it the right group of people? Am I identifying it in the right way? So, and that's one of the challenges of, say, subacromial pain or non-specific lower back pain, because people will then turn around and say, well, how do we know who we were studying? Because the tests are so rubbish and vague, right? So the group is not as specific as we would like, and that, by definition, is reductionist, isn't it? Because it has to be. To control all of those variables, you are, controlling things. You are reducing the pot of people that you are looking at, and that's the point, isn't it? So, what you'd want to see in the methods are, is it the right group of people? Are they testing the problem in the right way? Where are they recruiting them from? Again, things like, how are they blinding? So, people talk a lot about things like double blind, and you must have heard that kind of terminology. But actually, you don't need to double blind. If you look at reporting, only the outcome assessor actually needs to be blinded. The participants don't need to be blinded per se, and the interventionist doesn't particularly need to be blinded. But the people that are viewing the outcomes, they do need to be blinded. They need to be separate from the experiment. And that's one of the big problems with physical therapy, if you like, because if I have someone receiving exercise and manual therapy, well, it's very difficult to blind that, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, tricky.
It's almost impossible to blind that. If I give you a pill, a sugar pill, and for sake of argument, topical one, Tylenol, for example.
God, you can't get that anymore, apparently. It causes autism. Yeah. Let's not go down that road. That would be massively embarrassing. Yeah, if we start talking about that.
So that's easy, isn't it? Because I can have two pills that look very similar, and you don't need to know which one you're getting. And it's one of the reasons why when we talk about having a sham for exercise, that's really difficult. Because, you kind of, how do you sham exercise? How do you pretend to exercise? So what they end up doing is they end up like exercising your arm instead of your leg or something like that, So, exercise, you don't sham the exercise, you kind of exercise a different body part. But then you also have systemic effects, which is problematic. Anyway, but it's about the methods, is about how did you do the experiment? So who is it? What am I trying to identify? How did I go about, setting up the experiment in terms of blinding and randomization, and then also the interventions as well. So if you are doing manual therapy versus exercise, which exercise? How did you standardize the application of that? Right. So it's just going into all of those things and ticking all of those boxes. And then, like look at things like, have you pre-specified the size of effect that you think you're going to get? Have you kind of done a sample size calculation? So did you just guess how many people you wanted, or did you actually calculate how many people you wanted, including how many people might drop out, etc.? Right? Because if your power calculation says you need 50 people per group, then you 50 people, but 20 in each group drop out. Actually, you've only got 30 in each group. So the statistics and the p-value are going to be solid as if you were able to have, what you pre-specified. And there's also, people talk about pre-registration, where actually what you're meant to do is put all of this stuff as a pre-registered thing so that people can go back and see, you actually did it before the experiment, not after the experiment.
Yeah.
You're not trying to mess about and change things, and actually you did what was specified.
Can you go, sorry, could you go a little bit into sample size? Because I know it's tempting, I think, for people to think, for example, they look through, and I do it, if I'm kind of doing a presentation or workshop and I'm giving a study and it's like sample size 30 runners, then inside I kind of feel my heart drop a little bit thinking, oh, they're going to say only 30 people. But it's not a case that sample size has to be big for it to be valid, because it's all to do with the size effect, isn't it? And what you're looking at.
Well, that's the point of the power calculation.
Yeah. The power calculation is what, a series of checks, isn't it, where they look at all these individual kind of criteria to see what size effect you've got, what sample size you need to be relevant, and that sort of stuff, yeah? Because a lot of people won't know what that is.
What you want to, and I'm just going to point out, I am not a statistician. And
you know more than us joined together. So just
it's very pseudo. So I think there's a big difference between, being capable of reading a research paper, quite slowly and methodically, and then actually being super hot on the stats. Quite often that I will, I've built up a few connections in my years in this game. And there's, a few people that I trust that are pretty special around this stuff. So if I have any issues, then I will just, write off and say, what do you think about this, etc. Power calculation is telling us you pre-specify what you're looking for. So what is your p-value you're looking for? The type of things. You're going to type it in, and then it's going to spit out and say, to find that size of effect, you're going to be different people. So a power calculation, is going to give you the kind of, remember that a sample size can be too big as well.
Tell me about that. Okay.
So if your sample size is really big, it actually can give you false positives, I remember. Okay. So it will actually find, the calculations can find some answers within the, and again, if you wanted to talk about p-values, then you should probably get a statistician in. There's a difference between reading a paper and doing the stats on a paper. I think that's really important. Checking methodology, checking, are they looking at the right clinical groups? Have they gone through certain things is very different to the intimacies of the stats. And I'm, very pseudo stats, if I'm being really honest. But a sample size calculation at least tells us that they aren't, it's not just random. This has been, and you can get a sample size calculation on the internet. There are websites that will give you a calculation. So if you typed in sample size calculator into Google, it will give you a calculator and ask you what's the size of the effect you're looking for, what's your p-value, and then it will spit you out, a number to that. But a calculation at least shows that they've done that, and that would be a big thing that I would be looking for. So, but what you've got to remember is different types of research is going to have different sample sizes. If you're doing fMRI research, it's deeply expensive, deeply time-consuming. You are not going to get 100 people in your sample. It's just not going to work. But I think they talk about really what I think we mostly see. Let's say we have 2 or 3 groups. Generally, it will be somewhere between 30 to 50 in a group. You generally won't get many more than that, if I'm being honest. And that would be with a sample size calculation. And that's the boring critical thinking ever. Oh, the sample was small. Well, what is a big enough sample size? Again, that is dependent on the type of study, the calculation. You see, it's not a generic answer. Oh, you need 3,000 people per group. It doesn't work like that. But I think it is important to report a sample size calculation, because otherwise, what are they aiming for? I think that is something that you need to look at. That at least they have done it. You might not understand it, but they have done it and reported it.
That's great, and that would be in the methodology, yeah. It would be mentioned there.
Yeah. It's going to be in the methodology. Yeah.
Perfect.
Method section is usually the biggest. That should usually take up the most, especially a randomized controlled trial, because that's the meat and the two veg of that type of paper, isn't it? I
think it's useful as well I was very lucky because I was my education. Twitter actually helped my education, probably with you as well. Back in the good old days where you could ask a question, you wouldn't be jumped on or cancelled or anything. And there was some really useful conversations which happened. It was lovely.
Oh, great conversation.
You know, it was great. Nowadays, social media, we've done an episode about this. It's probably the last place you want to ask a question anywhere because it's just people just jump in. Even good-meaning people, we've forgotten the way just to be nice to each other. I was thinking, I mean, it's just because you're on the show and we go back a few years. But do you remember when, like, on Twitter, there used to be like weekly kind of, we used to kind of do like Follow Friday.
Follow Friday. Where
Can you imagine that happening today? These days it's like Hang Friday, or is it a list of people who to cancel? It's like, what happened to just recommending people and sharing stuff and just
because I think I that Twitter, you know, was obviously destroyed by, you know, the platform itself. But then I also think it became, some of the characters within it became very prevalent and toxic. And they just weren't around when that was the good, you know, the 2010, probably to around, you know, 2015, maybe, where people on a Friday used to say, these are great guys, go and follow them. And you could put up a blog and people would share and, you know, it became a little bit, not my cup of tea, not my cup of char.
That's a shame. But I mean, if you're in a group, I mean, I'm biased, but STA have weekly chats. But if you're any group association where you know no one's there to make a point or to make you feel bad or to kind of judge you, and I think it's really useful if you are going through a research paper with the knowledge you're getting from Ben now, just to have the confidence to type or say if it's a Zoom call. They haven't got a power calculation going on here. Is that something which we should kind of raise or talk about? Just if that's what you're thinking, or the sample size here, is that correct? Because that's how you learn, isn't it? You've got to ask questions.
When you say things like, is it a good paper or is it a bad paper? You know, I would say if it doesn't have something like that in it, I probably would trust it a bit less.
That's fair enough.
Unless it's an old paper,
yeah.
When not everything is reported as well as it is now, but certainly, you know, you would expect to see that in there. And I do a research review most weeks, whether that's, you know, for the Better Clinician Project, for my own stuff, or for Physio Network or something like that. And you know, these are just my mental checklists that I'm going to go down, and if they're not there, I'm a bit like, you know, how do they get these numbers? That makes me trust it a little bit less.
That's great. Exactly what we wanted to hear. That's great. Okay, so methodology, and then I guess we get to probably the most complicated part of the paper, the results. Yeah.
Yeah. So results are actually some of the thing that I like the best, because what you've got to remember about results, they have a commentary. It is just raw data. Well, it's not raw data, you know, you can still mess about with it, but it's just the numbers reported. So, you know, what you'd want to do is you'd want to go and see if it's an RCT and you are comparing two groups, are they reporting the between group exercise? Right? So what you want to see is what is the whole point of an RCT is comparison. So, you know, one of the big things we talk about is, does it tell you about your patient? Does a paper tell you about your patient? Not individually, because you cannot compare individual against individual against individual against it's an impossibility. So that's why you have an average of two groups. So you have an average for each group, and then you compare those two averages, and that's the only. It does a brilliant thing imperfectly, if that makes sense, because it gives us population level information, and we're looking for individual level information about our patient, really, but we can't get that. That's impossible. So the next best thing is who has done an experiment on this and looked at this population data. So it is imperfect, but the whole point here is that we're going to take two groups and we are going to look at the difference of those numbers between two groups, and you could report that as a statistical significant difference, which would be your p-value. You know, is it 0.06? Is it 0.04? You know, actually, if you think about that dichotomous p 0.05, how much difference is there between 0.6 and 0.4? Well, not a lot. You know, that's why we look at that and think, some like a Bayesian statistical kind of person would look at that and say, it's dichotomous, isn't it? It's this kind of, why has this been stuck here? Whereas someone who, a Bayesian approach might be a bit more, is there that much difference between 0.6 and 6 and 0.4? But that's where you're going to see those in the results. You're going to see the actual real number, hopefully, or you might see what's called a calculated effect size. And a calculated effect size is when they look at things like Cohen. You must have seen Cohen's D. And you might see 0.2 or 0.5 or 0.8. And that's what you call a calculated effect size, where they, play with the numbers a little bit versus an effect size that might be, on a VAS of 1.4. That would be the real number, not a calculated effect size. And that's what you're looking for. Are they reporting, if you're biased and you wanted your intervention to show something positive, you might show what's called the within group change. So we know that all groups will change over time. We could call that natural history or, regression to the mean or whatever. And one is more the nature of the problem. One is more repeated measurement. And so what you'll see with any group generally is a change over time. But if both groups change over time the same, there's no between group difference. But if you wanted to report a difference, you might report the within group, not the between group. So again, the result allows to look at that raw data. And if someone said there's a difference, we could go to the results and say, how big is it? And that's the famous, Gene Glass quote. And I think he says, and you've got me here really late. My bedtime was about an hour ago.
Sorry.
I'm an old boy, aren't I? You forget this, man. I've got grey in my beard, big boy. So Gene Glass says it's not, is there a difference? It's the size of the difference that's important. And this is an example of where size matters, Matt. Whatever your wife may tell you, this is where size matters.
Ben Cormack, ladies and gentlemen.
Yes, you knew what you were getting, buddy.
But it's cool because people who are kind of thinking, there's a lot of acronyms here and Cohen's D and all that. You just look it up. This is where Google can be your friend. It's like if you go to Cohen's D, then it'll tell you like 0.5 is a medium effect, 0.8 is, and then 0, and it's you can look these things up. They've always got complicated things with Greek symbols because that's just the way the language is used. But the significance of them is fairly easy to look up and suss out and write down a bit of paper. So don't be put off by the acronyms and the different methods they're using. So sorry, I just wanted to say that.
Yeah, of course. And again, it's like reading a paper. If you find a word or something that you don't recognize, well, some people throw their toys out of the pram. I'm stupid. They're stupid, and other people might say, well, let's just Google it. And,
Google it, yeah.
And it's just about slowly edging forward, isn't it? And building your knowledge. And the problem is people want knowledge given to them in the sense of day one, here's all the knowledge, download it. Like a flash drive. And unfortunately, knowledge is something that's built over a lifetime, isn't it? And whether that's pathology, whether it's assessment, whether it's research, whether it's exercise prescription, whether it's techniques, all of it is just a life. But would be boring if you had everything at the fingertips.
I think, that's what this current generation is discussing and finding out, and look at all the problems they've got. Yeah, but we won't go down that road. It's true. Discussion.
But your result, but your discussion is opinion, isn't it? It's like a
blog. That all depends, doesn't it, on the methodology and the introduction and everything and the biases, because otherwise, what they say in the discussion is all their opinion.
What they're trying to do, two things. So they're trying to say why they think they saw the results. And then the other thing that they often do is compare and contrast to other research that's similar. So if you've got similar results to 𝐤𝐤𝐸 2017, why did we get similar results? If it's a contrast, why do we see a contrast? So it's trying to explain what we see and what else has been done in the field that might be similar as well. But essentially it's an opinion piece, isn't it? And you may look at a piece of research and say, I don't actually agree with much in the discussion. If I look at the methodology and I look at the results, how much do I actually agree with their discussion? And I think that's, yeah, but that's the point of the discussion. It's, it's not meant to be factual. Well, it is, it is factual, but not meant to be just raw data. It is meant to be a bit of an opinion on what we saw and how that may compare and contrast to some other stuff as well.
Good stuff. This is cool. I'm hoping people are benefiting from this. There's a little bit of jargon in there, but really it's just a nice methodological. It's challenging that word, isn't it? Methodological. Easy for you to say. And yeah, you just work your way through it. It's like you say, learning it bit by bit. But it's interesting how those early kind of foundational things are important if you're to be able to interpret and have a look at the discussion and everything. Otherwise, it just all falls out.
So for me, both of my degrees, I did some form of research in them, right? But doing research, I think, is different as to being a clinician interpreting research. I think they're two different skills. So I think that reading a paper from being a clinician isn't so much about the stats and knowing, t-tests and, whatever else, is on within that, linear regressions, etc. Right? What it's really understanding is what are the basics of these sections. That for me is really key. What are the basics that I'm seeing? And I think sometimes people want to understand too much too quickly. It's not like reading a book. It's not a novel. I wouldn't sit in the bath and read this. No, it's a grind.
You have though, Ben, haven't you? But you have though, Ben, haven't you?
But it is a grind. It's not meant to be Jackie. The one who wrote all the soft porn stuff.
Collins?
Jackie Collins. There you
careful,
go.
Mate, because that's careful because that's actually my cousin. So just leave it there, mate. That's actually related there. Yeah. I wanted to.
But you know what I mean. It's not meant to be that. It's not meant to be that type of throwaway literature that you read chilled out. It's it is meant to be a little analytical and difficult to read.
Something that I like to see, and maybe they're just putting it in there to make me feel comfortable with them and like them, but I love to see limitations. I like it when an author will automatically kind of mention at the bottom, hold on, we're excited by this, but let's have a look at what could be the limitations of what we found. So that's maybe a good sign if they mention limitations or strengthen limitations.
Well, let's say that dropouts is a great example. So let's say they had a huge amount of dropouts and they didn't mention that in the limitations. That would be a limitation, wouldn't it? Right. So yes, you'd look at it and they might say, well, we had problems recruiting, or we had people drop out, or, one of the tests that we use aren't as accurate as we would like, or, some other type of thing. Or they may say the strengths might be, it's a unique question. No one has asked this before, or we did it in a new way or something like, or a strength was the large sample size or the accuracy of using MRI over a clinical test, right? So there are all things where you might see those strengths and limitations that, that you may agree with or disagree with, depending on how well you've read the research, how much you've taken in. And if I read an RCT, there's no way I get everything the first time I read it. I often go back to papers and read them again, and I'm like, I didn't really see that first time, right? Because it's not easy to read. It's not a Jackie Collins novel. It is a piece of scientific literature. It said this to me, Steve Camper, and if you ever want to look at some good research breakdown, he did a JOSPT series. He's an Aussie. And Steve Camper said to me many years ago, research is not for clinicians. It's for researchers. And that's really important to understand. This is not written for your average clinician to read on holiday or on the bus or whatever. It's written in a certain academic language. And you could say there's an element of elitism within that because of the way that it's written. And, and for most people, I can totally understand why they're not going to engage massively with it, because it's not very exciting. It is quite boring and difficult. But I suppose the more you do it, the more efficient you become, the more stuff that you can read, the quicker you can read it, Again, that might become boring, because it does. But in the same point, you do get the information that you need from it quite a lot.
But I think that's a common theme amongst the great educators that I've surrounded myself with. It's like yourself and Dr. Claire Minshall, Jennifer Schoolier. We've got Melanie Boucher about fascia. They're all people who are researchers initially, but they're trying to translate that into a language which clinicians can understand. I mean, that's lovely to be dipping your toes in both. If you've got the skill to do that, then that's kind of a godsend. It's quite cool for us.
Yeah, but I wouldn't class myself as a researcher. I would say, if I do have a skill, it's probably taking some of this complexity and being able to get it across in, I like to think I'm a translator of information. I like to do heavy science in hard Cockney, and I think that has a certain charm, I would hope. Right? But yeah, for me, some of the other guys I think you talk about there are probably researchers. I'm not that, but I have learned how to do some of that and communicate it to people.
So humble, which is a nice segue to 100 citations. Congratulations. Not a researcher, but you've had 100 people mentioning you and thanking you for your paper on the biopsychosocial model is lost in translation. So well done, first of all. That must feel nice.
Yeah, look, that's a nice thing. I know that there are lots of proper academics that don't achieve that. So, a scummy Cockney boy like me, look, I'll give myself a little pat on the back for that one, eh?
Thank you. I hope Joe gave you a pat on the back as well. Joe Gibson has been on the show before. That must have been fun. Must have been. Was it? I mean, is it fun? Just a quick question off the cuff. Was this fun? Was it great? Was it nice working with these people?
Peer review was not fun.
Oh, okay.
So when I peer review papers, my main job is not to be an arsehole, right? So I look at other people's peer review comments and I just think, oh, really? You think that's a little pedantic. And sometimes it's, academic kind of showboating, if you like. Whereas I always say, I like to say to people in my comments, whatever I say is about making it more readable, not picking it apart ridiculously. Do you know what I mean by that? So for me, a lot of my peer review is readability. But for a lot of other people, it's an opportunity to be as pedantic as possible. And yes, we had a lot of pedantry within that. Ultimately, though, it's something like the third most cited paper in the journal or something. So I must say that pedantry obviously came out in a good result here. I'd have been pissed if that pedantry had 4 citations. So, at least there is a benefit. I've erased that memory.
I think it's a good example there of you just being ahead of the game. I've always regarded you as ahead of the game and a great person to follow because you challenge yourself, which is always a great sign of an educator. You're very fast to challenge your own biases. And, whilst people are still kind of thinking BPS, a solution to everything, and it's, as it happens, the pendulum swings too far, you're the person who goes, whoa, hold on, just put that Ben Cormack hook out, just gently pull it back. Not too far, but I see you as somebody who just kind of sticks their arm out and goes, whoa, easy there, hold on. And that's useful.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's a little bit of pedantry in itself, isn't it? But, one of the things that I'm not big on in this world, or the game as I like to call it, is fantastic. Look, it's really, really difficult working with people with painful problems. And I think any time one thing that I really don't like is the next fantastic thing, because I've seen all of them, whether it's biomechanical, whether it's pain science, whether it's, motor control. I like to say I'm like Taylor Swift. I've had a lot of eras. And
that's our soundbite for the, thank you for that.
I did an Insta post on that with my face on Taylor's
true, of course.
Yeah.
Taylor
Swift. But the point is that when you've seen the second coming of Christ a number of times, and now you're seeing, other things that, annoy me. And maybe I shouldn't get annoyed, I don't know. But I know that it's difficult. I know it's hard. I know well-done research often doesn't show fantastical results. So what really gets me is people proclaiming they've got the next big thing, they're going to do the next big thing, or they are the next big thing. And I think it goes against the reality of what I've seen here. I've seen from other people as well, and I've seen some other research. And so it's just, that's what drives me a lot of the time is, like, whoa. I've been around, I've seen a few things in my time, and I can smell that this maybe doesn't align with other research that I read or other things that I read or just what I've seen in clinic. Or it might just be that I'm a bit rubbish. I do not know. But I think that's often kind of what drives that, reeling things back in, is that, you're probably not better than that person or that person or that person, if you're honest with all of us.
It's a great message. I listened to you and it's just thinking that's a great message that therapists could help their practice and help their patients and everything. It's just an approach, isn't it? A frame of mind, which again takes me on to the nice segue of you've got a new mentorship starting. I mean, first of all, let's do this in order. First of all, for people who aren't aware, go to core-kinetic.co.uk. You've got courses running at the moment. What have you got going on?
Yes, I was with an NHS hospital up in Manchester last week, in Germany this weekend, in Czech Republic. You know me, Matt. I've been around a while. I probably, I teach a fair bit. It's teaching's my comfort zone. I'm much better at talking about it than doing it in terms of being a clinician. It's much easier to talk about it than it is to actually help people. So I think they say people who can't do it teach, don't they? So there is that. But yeah, so look, I'm always that's really what I love and I enjoy. That's my vibe, really. Teaching, I like to think, as I said, I'd hopefully take some of these complex things, make them a little bit easier for people.
Oh, you do, without a doubt. So if soft tissue therapists, manual therapists, a lot of kind of sports therapists or massage therapists, if they go to the website, what sort of courses do you think might be useful for them?
Well, look, I mean, we've got our mentorship starting on Monday, which we go to evidence-based medicine. We talk about, philosophical understanding of looking at, how we actually understand the body, going kind of mechanics to biology. I like to talk about, understanding clinical assessment, those type of things, putting it into context. What am I testing? What am I actually looking at? What is it telling me? Things like pain science, biopsychosocial model, all of these things. I get into all of it. And we've got we've got chiros, osteos, physios.
I was going to say, it's fairly multidisciplinary.
Massively so. Yeah, there's S&C coaches. And I remember you came up to one that I ran about 10 or 15 years ago, Matt, and I think you did some gait analysis with us up at Canary Wharf. And now it's online because obviously it's easier to reach people all over the world, and I think we've probably got 15 countries represented so far. Again this year, which is fantastic.
Fantastic, yeah. So if you listen to the podcast and you wanted information about that, you can go to YouTube. I'm putting it up on the screen now. That's the advantage of watching it rather than listening to it, but it's totally up to you. Or you can go to the website and you'll see details. Or Instagram and Facebook. You're Core Kinetic on both of those, aren't you? Instagram and Facebook, if people want to follow you. And you're very good with your. It's very consistent. You put a lot of information out there. It's all there for people to have a little look at. And normally done in a.
It's like It's like a testing ground. I like to test a few ideas and see what pushback I get from people with this crazy stuff that comes out of my brain,
Brilliant. Yes, the mentorship, if you are listening to this and you don't want to go to YouTube, then the mentorship is basically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but this is from one of your posts recently, it's an 8-week program, 2 hours per week, time commitment, watching, reading, 4 meetups, key research texts, case studies.
Yeah, online meetups. Yeah,
online meetups. But live with you, kind of chatting and talking people through stuff here.
Live online.
Yeah. And it starts September the 29th. So if you listen to this podcast, have you still got gaps on that, or?
Yeah, we've still got a few. It's online, so there's always a few gaps. Yeah, no, we've got a nice healthy cohort as usual. Coming through doors. So it's always nice to have to know that you're still relevant, Matt, even with a few white hairs in the beard. You're still relevant. I won't be next year, but maybe just for one more year.
You will be.
Let me be relevant.
No, because that's the other thing. As an educator, you've got longevity, because every other word you say is maybe, could be. It's the people who go, this is like this, Everything.
Because they get proven wrong, don't they? I've taken the easy way out.
No, it's the safest way, and that's what we should be with our patients more. Just saying this could work. If it's not, we'll go down another road. But let's try this. That's what we all need to be. Even though we're trained to be kind of like, this is going to work and this is going to help you because it worked for the last person. We just dig holes for ourselves and it gets stressful. But anyway, so yeah, mentorship, great thing. Go along to CorKinetic.co.uk, have a look at that, and the new mentorship starting on the 29th, which is only 6 days away. Fantastic.
Yeah, it's a Monday. Not long now, buddy. 6 days.
Very nice. Good fun. Right. Well, look, time. It's 9:01. I said you'd be in bed by 9:10, so I'm going to be a man of my word. Thank you so much, Ben, for joining us. Really, really appreciate it. Just quickly, got the Better Clinician project as well, which is a chance. How's that? Who's the best people who are going to benefit from that? Who's that designed for?
Again, we have got every type of clinician across the board with that, and trainers and massage people, and just like really, really, again, multidisciplinary. We've got a couple of thousand members on there, so it's pretty juicy and pretty spicy. And that I do that with, of course, with Adam, and we get to have a bit of a banter and have a laugh, while hopefully giving a little bit of information as well, and that's been really popular over the last 5 years.
Yeah, no, a lot of STA members have said nothing but good things about that. It's a cool combination. I think it's like, it's classics. It's going in. They go down like Morecambe and Wise, Little and Large. It's just you two have got that. You two have got that kind of, complements each other, and the final product by yourselves, wouldn't recommend it, but the two of you together, fantastic. Balance each other out.
Exactly. Yeah.
Fantastic, right?
Like one Mac.
Brilliant, really appreciate it. CorKinetic.co.uk, people, check it out. If you're interested in being an STA member, just putting this in there quickly before we finish, then make sure you do use the code podcast25. It'll get you 3 months extra if you join for a single year. So that's £75. Yes, you heard that correctly. £75 for an annual membership. And if you use the code podcast25, it'll get you 15 months instead of 12, only valid for new members. And if you're level 3 and qualified after 2014, then make sure you opt for associate member. Right then, that's it. We've come to the end. Next week, like I said, on the 30th, we're going to be reflecting on the recent Hands-on Hub and STA conference with Anna Maria Mazzieri, director of the ST School, Gary Benson, founder of the STA, and Andy Hosgood of Unlock with Andy and the Unbound Project. That's going to be 8 o'clock on YouTube, Sports Therapy Association channel or Facebook page. So do try and join us live if you can, because you will take away more from it by doing things live. Thanks, Ben. Really appreciate your time. 9:03.
Buddy, my pleasure.
Really nice to catch up with you. I hope we catch up face to face one day in the future before the superpowers just end it.
What was the conference that I remember? I did you did the online conference in COVID. Was that meant to be in person at the time?
Yeah.
And you switched it to online.
It was supposed to be a repeat of the Brighton one I did.
Yeah. And that was, and we would have bumped into each other then.
It's true. I'll have to try and drag you to Therapy Expo or something, or that would be nice.
Oh, no, don't let me at Therapy Expo.
You're thinking of the old day. The new day are very liberal. They're very chilled out. Very cool.
We'll see about that.
All right, mate. I won't give you more.
I get conference invites anyway.
Thank you so much. We'll catch up soon.
Spain next week.
Where's that?
Exotic. Spain. It's in Europe.
Oh, very nice. No, I thought you said... I see. Spain. Yeah, I know the place. I think I lived there for 9 years. Is San Diego Pain Summit still happening?
Oh, the Pain Summit. I did that 3 times, actually.
Yeah.
I did the San Diego Pain Summit. 2017, 19 and 20. I think it ran out of steam, unfortunately. But it was a great conference.
Yeah. I think Americans run out of steam, but anyway. Right. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. Look after each other, look after yourselves, and maybe see some of you live next Tuesday. Bye-bye, and thanks once again to Ben Cormack. Take care.